Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. Glad to have you here today as we continue to explore more about this mind model, how our mind operates, how it creates our reality, and essentially, what's the source of chronic illness, the underlying catalyst, I should say, to chronic illness. I want to point one thing out that it's unwise to just say that one thing is responsible for um, one cause is particularly the cause for one effect. It's really unwise to do that. But the underlying catalyst to nearly all chronic illnesses is going to be the subconscious mind program for self mutilation in some way. And we will look at some examples of that today. Remember how the law of compounding works. So, whenever we have a perception put into us at as a young age, particularly in the time of the womb to the first few years of life, and as we go through life, new experiences that match that perception that are already held compounds those perceptions, and they grow stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's how things work. We have an initiating wound, and then as we go through life's experiences, they get stronger and stronger and stronger as reinforcement until it finally spills over into symptoms and manifested chronic illness. And what we see is a tremendous amount of doctors, whether they're conventional medical doctors with allopathic medicine and drugs and medications and surgery and steroids, or they are functional medicine, naturopathic doctors, um, integrative specialists that are using, IV vitamin C or, detox methods, whatever it might be. Most of the time, I'm going to say a significant amount of time, these underlying subconscious programs for self mutilation are completely ignored. I am the subconscious healer, Dr. Gabe Roberts. Glad to have you here with me today as we begin to, or rather continue to explore these matters on what's the underlying cause for a majority of chronic illnesses. And I've learned this over 10 years of experience, painfully doing things the best I could through being a diplomat in nutrition, an energetic worker, working with acupuncture and bioenergetic synchronization technique, quantum integration, breathing methods, all kinds of different techniques, emotional freedom technique, body code, emotional code, all kinds of different emotional clearing techniques, trying to work on my patient's mind, trying to work with their mind and their physical body. And, when we're working on stealth infections, things like that. And what I found is a majority of people will sabotage themselves. They will recreate their illnesses in some way completely at an unconscious level. They're not meaning to, it's unintentional. They don't wake up in the morning and decide, hey, I'm going to spend thousands of dollars on functional medicine work, on nutrition that insurance doesn't cover, just to sabotage my results. Nobody consciously decides that. Um, these are all deeper programs of these self mutilation that completely escape the awareness of the person. And this happens majority of the time. So, one thing that I want to cover is let's first start with remember the basics, okay? You are a sum total of your past experiences. And the truth is that you will manifest in your life the goals, the expectancies um, developed and held through your perceptions that were formed in your earliest mind. It's the subconscious mind's goal achieving agency, the most powerful one known to humanity, that it will pursue these perceptions and deliver in your life all those conditions that you are currently holding as perceptions. They will be delivered on time. It's bankable. Um, and it's just, a tad confusing because majority of people don't understand this. They overlook it. They think, I will just say this, many people I know that um, have some kind of basis of the subconscious may talk about it very intelligently, but very, very few grasp these characteristics I'm talking about. of it being such a powerful goal achieving agency, the very most powerful foundation of it is memories in the womb. I'm going to give you an example here of one that's quite strikingly, probably one of my most intriguing and severe cases I've ever had. I'll share that with you today of just what this, how this works, this memories that we have in the womb, how they impact us years later, decades later. Many people don't understand that, even if they are familiar with the subconscious mind. And one reason is because there's not a lot of information out there that discusses this. You, like myself, I had to learn this through trial by error. I thought I knew the subconscious until I really started going into the window of people's chronic illnesses with them and found that it always takes us to somewhere between 0 to 5 when we get to the root cause. Now, it doesn't always take you there, but sometimes it may veer off and go somewhere else, especially if the person has held perceptions that they're protecting, or the subconscious mind interprets as, something that happened to us during in the womb or childhood is so heinous, so terrible that the subconscious is almost like, I'll take you anywhere you want to go, but not there. So suddenly it'll veer you off to some memory of 1860 when you're out there in a field somewhere, and it might give you an idea that, hey, this is where we need to go. This is kind of a significant problem. And as we're there and we're resolving that issue it took us to, that doesn't seem relevant, but it's a very real memory that pops up in a person as I'm doing work with them. It comes to the conclusion that their symptoms don't go away, or they improve a bit, but they're still having problems. It's because the subconscious mind veered us off. Like, if you're, imagine trying to go up the root of a tree, up the trunk of a tree rather, and you're trying to get to the very, 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 very top, and it just keeps taking you down branches that lead you kind of to the side of it, or kind of at an angle somewhere else rather than to the top. It can be the same way with the subconscious mind. It's like a cluster of grapes, and unless you get to that very, very stem, that is the very core of holding all of those branches of all those grapes, it can wind you down and take you down some branch where you'll, hit a cluster of 10 grapes. You'll get a change in a person, but it's not looking for the change that you're wanting, especially when it comes to reversing those chronic illnesses, or those um, terminally labeled illnesses, autoimmune conditions like that. You have to get very specific on where it goes, um, not just veer off on some detour. So you have to. The work I do is very detective like, not just letting the subconscious go anywhere it wants, but ensuring that it takes us to where we need to go. And sometimes we have to have a discussion, the patient and I, to make sure that they're willing and able and, fully on board going where we need to go. One of the questions I've heard sometimes is, what happens if a person doesn't want to face their traumas? What happens if they had such a terrible childhood that it was just abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, perhaps, and it's just something where their subconscious has locked that into a cellar and thrown away the key, but yet they have to, they have these manifestations as an adult that they want to heal, but they don't want to go there. Well, one of the things you have to understand is, if you read my book, there's a chapter on the trauma mechanism, and it basically discusses the trauma is a significant emotional spike when the person feels helpless or hopeless, as if, you're a 2 year old or a 3 year old child, or maybe even an infant, and something really, really bad is coming your way. Like, somebody's going to cross your borders, your boundaries, and commit some kind of sexual act, let's say. Well, there's a part of your mind that says, no matter what I do, I can't prevent what's coming. And there's this millisecond of hopelessness when there's such a high emotional spike that as it reaches its peak, it gets to what is a millisecond away from threshold. And threshold is the maximum your nervous system can handle. If a person hits threshold, it's like their entire body short circuits, and they would perish. Well, nobody hits threshold in a traumatic event because there's a protective mechanism that happens. So the person may faint, the person may just get frozen, they may hold their breath, get shocked for, just kind of shock for a moment, overwhelmed there as that emotional spike hits the millisecond below threshold. A protective mechanism kicks in, walls that entire event off, and stores it. And where it's stored, that's an interesting question. We'll cover that in just a moment. But it's a pocket of consciousness, like a file gets, it's like a your subconscious zip files that and stores it somewhere, not necessarily in your body, but maybe around your body, or even in the morphic field, which is a field that um, surrounds your entire body. And its measurements, they've measured this field from anywhere from 3 to 8 feet that extends outside of your body, also called the torus field. Just Google human torus field and you'll see this field that's measurable with instruments. But when they asked, why is it only 3 to 8 feet? The scientist said, well, that's the limit of our measuring apparatuses. So for all practical purposes, this thing goes everywhere. This thing is not just limited to around our body, but it connects everything um, beyond space and time. And there is journals and scientific investigation has concluded that that thing is beyond space and time. So that's why we're able to suddenly jump back to something, because time is kind of an illusion of the conscious mind. Everything is happening right here, right now. That's kind of the reality. Our conscious mind puts things together in kind of a construct to where we think there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, but that's just an illusion, for better say. So the trauma mechanism is whenever there's an emotional spike and it hits near threshold and it gets captured, that it walls that entire scene off and stores it into this morphic field that can be accessed later. But the problem is the part of the person, the individual that has this occurrence take place, there's a part of their subconscious mind that does not know that event is over. It still believes um, that emotional spike is still happening, and it's stored as a holographic imprint, like a wound. And all it takes is activating one fragment of that for the system to go active, for your brainwave to match exactly the same brainwave as when the emotional state occurred, even if it's decades later. Imagine a soldier who has spent time in Iraq and is used to seeing B 52 bombers fly overhead and drop these bombs. Well, years later, maybe decades later, they could be in their backyard and they hear a commercial airliner flying overhead, and the sound of that jet sounds eerily similar to a B 52. They hear the sound that activates a fragment of that hologram, and suddenly they're having a post traumatic stress disorder related flashback. Happens all the time. Happens all the time if you smell apple pie and suddenly you're taken back to your grandmother's kitchen as a child, or you hear a song and suddenly you're taken back to prom, or you see a 1969 gorgeous Mustang and you think of one that your dad had when you were a child. That's just how it works. Our mind works in those holographic imprints, and all we have to do is activate a fragment of that for that memory to be revived. And it can happen both good and on bad circumstances, like I just described. So let's look at the idea that memory is stored in this field around us. Okay. Um, but whenever I say things like a panic attack or a relive, like this, I just described this soldier, what I want people to understand is anyone who's never experienced one, uh, or they can't remember a time when that's happened, it is perceived as feeling just as real as whenever the actual event was recorded. Okay. So this can happen whenever, we can take an entire event stored in one of those holographic imprints when we're overwhelmed, and it becomes pain in the neck. It becomes a shin splint or a migraine headache. It can become things like bursitis. It can even become things like hearing loss. And it can definitely become things like chronic illness, terminal illness, cancer, autoimmune, but it can even be something as simple as stuttering or nervous twitches. So these are all ways that memory can show up in our body. And there's certain times of people's life, if you know somebody that has difficulty stuttering or they have nervous twitches, when they get stressed, it seems like those symptoms get worse. Why? Those memories are getting activated. This last weekend, I was at an event with a large group of doctors and professionals, and one of the doctors on stage said that scars can be a potential um, barrier to healing. And she described an event that happened to her when she was a child where she had a biking accident, scarred her face. And whenever she had an esthetician working on her face and massaging her face, when they touched that scar, she had active nauseous and some feelings of anxiety come up in her. And she was describing this when she was on stage. The minute she was saying that, I don't think that she understood what she was really talking about, but what she was talking about was a pocket of memory that just went active. That's exactly what it was. So if you have any scars on your body from some injury from the past and you notice if something massages that scar, touches it, and suddenly you feel a panic, you feel like your body's getting nervous, your heart rate's going up, you are activating a pocket. You're activating a fragment of that memory, a pocket of consciousness, and it's going active. That's essentially what it is. Um, if you understand the holographic deletion in my book, you'll have a very, very powerful tool right in front of you that will show you how to get rid of that. So, massaging that scar, it will, it will not long, it will no longer be relieved. It will no longer be revived. You can actually access those things, change that holographic construct, and basically turn it off so your subconscious mind interprets it as over. So, very powerful tool in that book, From Pain to Purpose, a guide on how to reverse post-traumatic stress disorder. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you um, put that on your list of books to read because it can help you activate. It can help you find these things inside your body that are perhaps not serving you. Things that are, causing you to have distress, past divorces or bankruptcies or whatever else it is. Anything you can name it, anything that's distressful to you that's happened in the past, you can literally change the coding of how your subconscious mind has recorded that. So when we look at how memory is stored, and I just kind of talked about how these things can go active. This is something that's, this professional that was on stage didn't, I don't, she didn't get the idea of what she was really discussing. She was just talking about how a scar can be a potential barrier to healing and giving an example. But this is something that's also ignored by modern medicine. Um, there's there's some small groups in the ranks of medicine that are now looking at it and accepting it. Small groups of scientists are making sense of it. And it's been given a label so we can kind of discuss it. It's something called morphic resonance. And it's also a way that how memory can get inherently um, stored in nature. So let me give you an example of this. A professor named William McDougall from Harvard was putting together uh, studies involving rats, and he had this maze that had water in it, and he would put a rat in this maze, and the rat would swim through the maze, and there was only two ways for the rat to escape. One hole was kind of a desired area where if the rat went through the hole, he would escape the maze. The other hole, the only other exit he could get out of this maze, had a small light, but if the rat went through this area that was lit up, he would receive a mild electric shock. So William McDougall put together this maze and would drop this rat in this maze and count how many times it takes before the rat would only escape out of the desired exit, the desired hole. And he was doing this to see if intelligence could get passed down. And as he would put this rat in this hole, it would swim through the maze and he would count how many times it takes before it just goes anywhere he drops it in the maze. It would swim right to the desired exit and leave. And it took around 250 tries. So he's doing this over and over, counting. And rats are pretty easy to study because they have a relatively short life. Over a span of several months, you can see a rat go through early stages of development to the teenage years, to the young adult, to the adult until older age. So you can look at the lifespan of a rat within several rats, perhaps within a year's time. So they're real easy to study. So he does this with the rat. It takes around 250 times before the rat will only go to the desired exit. Well, he takes the offspring of that rat, drops it in the same water maze, and counts again. And now suddenly it's around 190 times. So significant better. The offspring had passed the course, per se, um, so to speak, in a very, very with much less time, less trials. So he takes the offspring of this rat. So now we're at 3 generations later, drops it into the water maze, and now it's around like 140, something like that. 140 times this rat takes to escape. So they were getting better. And when he was doing this, other scientists from other parts of the world looked at some of his research and decided they wanted to reproduce it. So a there was a in Scotland, and then there was another place in Australia where scientists looked at his studies, his publications, and they said, "Hey, I want to put this same thing together." So they put together the exact same water maze. They did the same dimensions, and they got the same species of rat. Now, you're talking from Harvard to Australia and Harvard to Scotland. So, completely different sides of the world, but they use the same dimensions of water maze and they use the same species of rats. Well, when they started, particularly one in Australia, when he started putting his rat into this water maze that William McDougall had made the same dimensions, his rat started off where William McDougall's left off. So his rat started around 140. Now, if you're paying attention to that, that should almost give you goosebumps. Uh, it just shows that memories are not stored in our brain like we think they are. And memories are not just something that happens and they get recorded in our brain. There's been a number of studies where they have went looking for memories in the body and they really couldn't find it. So how can memories impact us like we're talking about? How can these self-mutilation programs decades later impact us? Well, whenever it happens, it goes into this field almost like it's getting loaded into an iCloud, but it can still have influence over us. It can impact us. And like I described, whenever those memories go active, we can have symptoms come back. Symptoms such as lump in the throat, nauseous stomach, um, vice on the head when we get nervous or when we get upset. Whenever we're going somewhere we don't want to go, let's say we're going to an in-laws house and we're not really, we're telling ourselves deep down, man, I don't know. I don't want to go there. She always upsets me. She said that one thing and upset me. Suddenly your heart's racing. Well, it's a good chance that it's not just your sympathetic fight or flight system getting active. There's something before that going active that's triggering your nervous system to go active. It's likely some memory or perception you carry of an event that occurred, and that thing gets re-triggered on the way to their house, and that's what you're reliving. These things are happen all the time to us, and we overlook them. So these memories can get uploaded into an iCloud, and they can impact everything, and they can impact people, that have had similar resonant experiences. I mentioned that at one point I worked with a woman who had stomach pain, really relentless stomach pain. Nothing had helped her. When we asked her subconscious to take us to the very source of it, um, she goes back to this scene. I want to describe it as like an old Chicago scene, almost like the old gangster style, the Dick Tracy type outfits with the Tommy gun theme. You kind of get the idea. Some kind of old Chicago scene with gangsters, And at this point, as a detective, I almost wonder if her subconscious mind is taking us to something that had to do with her childhood memory, or if it's actually taken us to the key event behind that has everything to do with this relentless stomach pain. And in this case, it was. In this case, it had that was we were at the key event of significance. And she's describing a scene where she's a man and she's working with these other gangster type men. And one of her, I guess her associates stabbed the other one in the stomach. So the person that she was betrayed, double crossed, and stabbed in the stomach. And that stabbing motion in the stomach created a holographic imprint that got uploaded into an iCloud of consciousness that we all have some kind of partial connection to. But yet there was something about her in particular where she had a strong resonance with that. Um, she had a strong vibrational match to something about this gangster to where it influenced her enough to where suddenly her stomach pain had begun hurting and hurting and hurting. When we changed that scene, her stomach pain completely went away. I know it almost sounds like something science fiction that you could not even imagine. But yet these things happen because the subconscious mind, when I discuss it, I don't mean just something that the psychiatrist or the psychologist or even the doctor and sometimes even the chiropractor would interpret it as. Because whenever I went through chiropractic college, we were taught the subconscious mind was a unconscious autonomic nervous system that controls your heart rate, your digestion. It controls your blood vessel, how constricted or how relaxed they are based on certain times when you're either in a fight or flight, or you're rest and digest, or you're in the mood of eating and digesting food, or you're in the mood of fasting. So, and that's about it. When I talk about the subconscious mind, not only am I talking about those parts, the autonomic nervous system that takes place, but also a connection to the web of reality that goes far beyond us, that goes far beyond our perceived physical body and interacts with everything and everyone around us. And this is kind of where the gut feelings come in. This is kind of where the intuitive um and visions come into your mind. This is where things come into you that are better than you, that are greater than you. I don't mean to say better than you, but greater than your own understanding of things. Like if you're, let's say you're getting ready to make a road trip on a particular weekend and you're getting things ready, you're putting stuff in the car, and something tells you, I don't know if I should do this. I feel nervous. Um, you know, and you decide, well, maybe I don't know if I should do this. We should probably just stay home. And you decide to stay home. And let's say the area that you were going to go for this road trip um, has an earthquake, or there's some factory explodes or something like that. Your subconscious mind was cueing you and warning you of an impending danger, you know, and that's beyond your autonomic nervous system that controls your heart rate, right? It's something greater than you. It's something much more intelligent than what you could ever come up with your own mind. And that's what I'm referring to whenever I talk about the subconscious mind. It's connected to the web of reality, the web of, you know, everything. So, and whatever was happening with that gangster in Chicago style aspect that we visited was also happening right here and right now. That's why I say time is an illusion. So, of course, this has been ignored by many people. So let's look at this idea that the brain doesn't contain memories. The brain is more likened to a transistor in a radio. Okay, so if you think about that, music doesn't come from the radio; it comes through the radio. There's no way you're going to be able to bust open some radio like a stereo sitting there and find a small little Van Halen in there playing with his band. You see, it's not it's not from the radio, it comes through the radio. Now, thought in that aspect doesn't come from the brain. Just like the radio, it comes through the brain. So you look at these thought as cosmic waves that expand through everything. It comes through the brain. And the when we talk about memory, and current life happenings that are stored in the cells, um, or that are stored in this a field, they can impact it just like the radio picking up radio waves. Okay, so that's something to kind of keep in mind is memories are not something within us, but they can influence us, and they'll influence us through our body feelings. Okay. Whenever we have a body feeling, that's something perhaps influencing us, something inside of us that's going active. Once we have the emotional cascade take place, and then the voice kicks in our head, that is all from an interpretation. So let me discuss what I told you I would earlier, and this was whenever I had once a person contact me who had really chronic illness, really bad. On his paperwork, he was I think a 50-year-old man, and he had previous diagnosis of leukemia, and he had went through a number of holistic therapies, and he was starting to improve. There were some improvements going on, and um, I know his white blood cell count had gone up to around 200,000. Um, and at one point it was roughly around 10,000. So there was some improvements and things, but he came in, he came through Zoom, met me, and he filed on his paperwork that he had chronic illness that just, it would just kind of come and go. And so, if you're not familiar with the routine, we sat down together. I asked his subconscious mind to take us to the very first scene, the very first circumstance, the very first situation that had everything to do with the reason for this chronic illness. And suddenly, his mind takes us back to a time when this man started actually right across from Zoom. He turned beet red and started screaming and crying. And, even though we had him anchored in safety, uh, he had a very, what you'd call an abreaction. He had a really strong abreaction. Now, it's never my intention um, for anyone to have this kind of reaction, but it only lasted a millisecond. All this was just a millisecond. First, he's sitting there. Suddenly, he's screaming and crying, turning beet red. And what had happened in this scenario was he heard his mom and dad talking with an abortion doctor, and they, for all practical purposes, were just about to do an abortion with him, and he could hear everything, and he could just sense that overwhelming fear. But at the last minute, the mom decided not to do it and backed out, and they got in the car and drove home. Now, for anyone that doesn't want to face their trauma, I want you to understand this man was plagued with a life of chronic illness, and all it took was just that 1 millisecond of him sensing that moment, realizing and hearing verbatim. He was actually telling me what they were saying. Um, but when he realized exactly what was going on, of course, it was overwhelming. And so what we did was we completely reframed that scene. And after that, his chronic illness over the next few months started to completely normalize. His body completely normalized. His pain started going away. He was able to sleep through the night. He was able to trust life better. And these lifelong panic attacks with, an overwhelming impact on his HPA axis and his adrenal system, keeping him from actually healing, was actually able to stabilize, and he improved significantly. So this is this this is what I mean by a perception that can happen to us, can impact us. It can be stored in this etheric field, not necessarily in our body, but near our body, and impact us our entire life. Um, so it only took us just a millisecond. For anyone that's not sure of how to, that doesn't want to face their traumas, this was the case where this guy wanted to, but he had no idea what he was getting into. And it only took us working together a few minutes for him to step into that moment, be brave enough to tell me what was going on, and then completely change it. And just that simple change of perception had a significant improvement in his health from then on.